Okay, we'll get started. So welcome to our session of BioSummit. We've got two talks in this science that's a little bit shorter. I'm going to kick off with Emily Coyte from the site, because we'll be talking about the work that she did for her resident education. Thanks, Emily.
Yeah, thank you very much. So hi there, thanks for coming along. Today I'm going to be talking about bioscience teaching labs, and in particular what perceptions staff members like you who run and manage teaching labs, what you think about these teaching lab sessions, in particular what goals you might have for these sessions, what challenges you might face, and what you think about student inquiry, by which I mean decisions which students make within these sessions about the experiments that they're doing. So you probably know what your own perceptions are, but I was really interested in the staff perceptions across institutions, and that was something I thought was missing in the literature. I saw a lot of things about individual interventions here and there, but I wasn't seeing much of a joined up picture. This work was part of my, it was my dissertation for my MRes in education research, which I took at the University of Bristol, which was part-time independent too, but alongside my work at LearnSite. So just to summarise what the research questions for the dissertation was, it was what goals do staff have for their students, what is, how is student inquiry perceived and used, and also what challenges and constraints do staff face regarding teaching labs. This was a mixed methods research. I was really keen to combine the breadth of a questionnaire with the depth of follow-up interviews. I got a good number of participation, I thought, and it all took place over the spring of 2021. So obviously there were COVID restrictions in place there, so everything was done online. In terms of goals then, what I don't mean experimental aims in terms of operationalizing here. So you might have a protein purification practical, that might be the experimental aim, but the goals might be higher level things such as working together in a team or connecting with lectures or getting used to the equipment. I won't dwell on these, but these were the 14 questions which were asked, and I asked participants to choose a year group which they worked with the most, and then answer these 14 questions on a percentage scale, how well it resonated with them, and it was derived from this literature reference here. Here's the results. I'll just summarise the top and the bottom findings. So there was a real sense of strong connection between lecture and lab. So there's clearly curriculum alignment in people's minds here. And data collection and data analysis were also really strongly in people's minds. There was less resonance with the goals of keeping a proper lab notebook, whether they should generalize to multiple disciplines, and whether communication skills should be developed within labs. But even they weren't rated too low, they were more middle of the road. I asked a free text question: what additional information would you offer about goals for your teaching lab sessions? And I performed a very simple content analysis on this. Got a good number of responses for this free text component, but skills were really the thing that came through quite strongly. Technical skills, practical skills, data collection, analysis, experimental design, these were things which people brought up off their own back. Transferable skills, huge range of that, as you can see. Affective aspects such as confidence, anxiety, enjoyment. There was a sense of forward thinking as well. So what were the labs for? And in this case, it was for future years and for eventual training as a research scientist. And even though it was unprompted, they brought up the lecture or theory connection, again, thinking about the application. For the interviews, I did reflexive thematic analysis. So that this fits in, it was a different method to what Steve Rutherford mentioned, but it had a kind of similar approach in that it acknowledged my active role as the researcher. And using this method, I'm not collecting simple like buckets or domain summaries of just what came out. I was trying to cut across that for patterns of shared meaning across individual points. I generated 4 themes in total, and the first one about goals was I really got a sense that staff value teaching labs as places for physical and social contact. The physical was the matter of students just being there in the lab, interacting with the equipment, using their hands, and just being there in that space. And the social contact combined student-to-student interactions, so students just getting to know each other, meeting each other maybe for the first time in a while, helping each other out perhaps. And I also got a sense that the staff valued it as a way to get to know students. Maybe not surprising given it was in 2021, so a lot of teaching was still online. So staff really valued these teaching labs as a place to get to know students, put names to faces. The second theme was teaching labs as a site for actively developing skills as applications for theory. And the active part was very prevalent. I got a sense that the student being there and doing the work and came through very strongly. Lecture connection did come through again as per the survey, but I got more of a sense that it was about applying the lecture content rather than simply reviewing it, for example. And the skills was very forward orientated, so skills for future research or whatever else they might want to do in the future. In terms of student inquiry then, so this was what decisions student can make about what experiments they're doing. There was a real mixed picture. These were questions which were based on inquiry rubrics, which were from these literature sources, about how to identify high levels or low levels of inquiry. On the right-hand side, you can see here, I got a sense that it's probably quite obvious, but most students end up analysing lab data themselves, but not all the time. There was some levels of individualization, so that would be, choosing small elements of the problem, but in very few cases were students determining the problem they want to solve, what procedures they want to use, or what method of analysis they might want to do. I combined each participant's answers to those questions into an inquiry score, and you can see the distribution here across the 79 participants. There was a huge range, but there was definitely a spike in the sort of low to middle range. I was interested in the correlations between inquiry score and the goals, and I found that those who scored high on inquiry, so those who had high levels of student decision-making within labs, were more likely to highly value scientific reason and lab notebook use, as well as research experience, communication skills, working together, and science appreciation. So those seem to correlate with inquiry, and that's what maybe these staff are actually valuing most out of their choice to use more inquiry. Very, very quickly going between years 1 and 2, there was more inquiry in year 2, which perhaps you might expect, but this didn't actually end up being significant statistically. However, looking at the individual questions, it seems like second year is where the individualization really starts to come in, and this was statistically significant. In the interviews, there was a sense of teaching labs having the potential to be tentative first steps of student inquiry. Timings within the university experience were important, with first years generally being given tasks to do, and second and third years having more choice. There was some frustration with cookbook labs, so that's the term for labs where students are just given a recipe to follow with a known outcome. General sense of like loose frustration, but they were seen as familiar, ubiquitous, and very much the default. There was a sense of intentions to add more student inquiry, but this was at tension with things like time availability and staff acceptance. And I will say that in the literature, there is a bit of contention between the relative merits of direct, explicit instruction and student inquiry. I believe that there's merits to both. It's just a matter of context, and that certainly seems to come through here as well. In terms of the challenges and constraints then, I first wanted to see, was it a lack of enjoyment or meaningfulness which might be a constraint? And that did not seem to be the case at all. Got a real sense that staff really value teaching labs, they found them meaningful learning experiences. However, of course, this was a self-selected survey on teaching labs, so it's not unreasonable to think that staff who enjoy teaching labs and are happy to engage with teaching labs might be more likely to take a survey about teaching labs. But nonetheless, the data was pretty unanimous for this question. I was also interested in whether agency, time, and budget could be limiting factors or challenges. And it seems like for agency and time, very mixed picture, but budget was pretty much strongly agreed to be a limiting factor. So more budget would allow them to give a better learning experience. The theme I got for the interviews was very different than anything I asked in the survey. So this shows that I probably missed a trick in the questions that I asked in the survey. So, I'd love to go back and revisit that at some point. But what came through time and time again in the interviews was the challenge was about alleviating student anxieties and hesitancies to engage. This might be, again, a COVID-related topic, but it seemed to be a perennial one from my discussions. Students are coming in with a huge range of lab experiences, as we know, or lack thereof. They're nervous about getting started, and some of them are unwilling to prepare for their lab sessions. When we moved on to thinking about how that was handled, the two main strategies were good communication with students, just making things absolutely clear, and also having that human connection aspect, so being really reassuring. These were the conclusions, which I've just covered, so I will just skip forward. This is where you can find me. Very happy to take questions, and thank you very much for listening.
What would your recommendation be for changes that we as academics can make to that provision to enhance student experience there?
I think, yeah, so think about your use of things like what you actually want to get out of teaching labs, what the higher level goals are, rather than just the experimental aims. Possibly it's something you do anyway. Think about whether you would like to incorporate more inquiry or not, or whether you feel like students aren't ready for that. And yeah, if you can identify where the limiting factors are and what you can get out of teaching labs. Obviously, there's not everything you can control, but there might be aspects. And I did get a sense that those who did use real like human connection and communication were successful in reducing those anxieties. So yeah, things like that. Oh, yeah.
Do you think any kind of the classroom approach to be able to combat any of that? So being able to introduce students to the lab environment before they're in the lab environment?
Yeah, I mean, I've got to be careful not to put my learning science hat on, and obviously I'd be like, absolutely. Yeah, I didn't really cover that in this particular study. We didn't talk so much about individual strategies, but it does seem like the anxiety that students were feeling came from not knowing what the lab would look like, or what the equipment would be like, or how it would feel to be there. So I do feel like that sense of having that increased knowledge of what it would be like, and knowing that the staff was on their side as well, were things that would help them feel more confident and able to crack on with the more deeper learning aspects of labs.
Often in our teaching labs, especially, and I'm sure it's the same for most people, they have, in fact, doing most of the groundwork are PhD students and demonstrators. Did anything come out, like a sense of how important they are for students in?
Yeah, it did come up a few times. It wasn't something that we dwelled upon, because it wasn't so much a challenge as much as something that yeah, it was just sort of something that was there. They were generally seen as valued, but you have to put the work in to make sure that they're trained and engaged as well. But yeah, they can definitely have an influence on the quality of the labs. Yeah.
I'm not sure if it came out in the surveys, but certainly I don't think anyone else is doing labs and super labs.
Oh, no.
But my labs, I'm doing 200 students in a lab, which is me.
Wow.
Like 6 hours, multiple times. And it's obviously a very different experience, so you have to, you can have a lab with 20 students with more of a personal contact.
Yeah.
In fact, that's a massive challenge. I'm not dreading it, but I'm really exhausting. Did anything come through about that as a challenge, or did you have to lab size or?
Yeah, I didn't. I'm trying to remember. There's a lot of information here. So these were the demographics. Just trying to see if there's any information about that. Most of them did run multiple labs, you can see over here. So a lot of them ran many labs, but I didn't go into detail about how long the labs were or the number of students, although that would have been really interesting to see how that would have related, because the general sense of like the massification of higher education did come up as an undercurrent. Just having so many students, not being able to know who any of them were, labs were the only chance they had to even meet some of them for more than 20 seconds. But no, that would definitely be a good thing to look at next, I think.
Thanks, Emily. It sounds like you're really basis for nerd there.
I keep thinking about it. Thank you.